Almería, 1928. The cicadas sang beyond the whitewashed barracks, their chorus mixing with the faint clatter of boots on the parade ground. Inside, Teniente Coronel Pedro Friedora bent over his desk, pen scratching across thick paper. He still wore his jacket, its brass buttons glinting in the sun. "The dust was choking us that morning," he wrote. "We had heard rumors, but none believed the Spanish army could fall to the tribes of the Rif. Only when reports came of a massive force advancing on Melilla did the truth of Annual strike us." He paused, rubbing his temple. Faces of comrades lost returned in silence. The cries of battle seemed carried on the nib of his pen. A knock. A young lieutenant entered, cap in hand. "Mi Teniente Coronel, the company reports are ready." "Leave them. I'll attend later." Alone again, Friedora stared at the ceiling beams, remembering those who never left the encirclement at Fort Baja Fuerte de Cabreritzas, where the Legion bled for a frontier Spain could scarcely hold. He set the pen once more to paper. "I write these words not for glory, but so the dead are remembered as more than names." Melilla was no mere battle. It was the crucible that tested the Legion and broke many of us. The ink dried quickly in the summer heat, but Pedro Friedora did not notice. He had returned in his mind to the shattered hills of Morocco, where the echoes of gunfire still lingered long after the war had passed. When the threat against Melilla grew certain, Coronel Milan Astre ordered his officers to their posts. Every bandera was to begin in the fort it had been assigned, for we could not afford confusion when the enemy came. The Coronel kept a reserve inside the town. Teniente Coronel Aguirre's bandera was placed in Fuerte Triana, with his 3 rifle companies and a machine gun company anchoring the line. Aguirre was young then, but had a gift for steadying men under fire. His strength was patience, and Triana needed a commander who would not spend lives too freely. Teniente Coronel El Cid was sent to Fuerte Alfonso. He carried himself with the easy authority of one born to command, and his men adored him. Quick to anger, quicker still to fight. But his bandera would not falter so long as he stood. Teniente Coronel Franco, ever eager for the fight, was given Fuerte Africa, where his men would prove as hard as the stones of the bastion itself. He had a calculating mind, and though ambition burned in him, no one could deny his ability to wring order out of chaos. Teniente Coronel Marcos González held Fuerte de Maria Cristina, his bandera well posted to cover the approaches. Marcos was deliberate, even cautious, yet no officer prepared more carefully for his battles. His men trusted him with their lives, and not without reason. Teniente Coronel Nictenuker's bandera was ordered to Alto Fuerte de Cabrerizas, a name ridiculous enough for such a lonely post, yet one that would prove vital if the tribes pressed that flank. He lacked polish, but he possessed a soldier's instinct, and his bandera followed him with the loyalty of hounds. And finally, Teniente Coronel Junkjack's bandera stood at Fuerte de Rostro Gordo, an unlovely but stubborn redoubt. Junk Jack was no man of speeches. His words were few, but his courage was plain. His bandera fought like he lived, silent, grim, and unyielding. Each was told the same: hold fast and wait. Until we knew the enemy's direction of advance, there was no sense in reckless movement. When the time came, the coronel would order the reserve forward, and the banderas would march to strike where the blow was needed most. Thus were the defenses of Melilla laid, and thus did we wait, listening for the first rumble of the storm that was to come.
Encamped the night before the advance on Melilla, the young brother of the great Rifian leader, Abd al-Krim al-Khattabi, Amar al-Khattabi, speaks to his council of war, Majlis al-Harb. Chiefs, commanders, brothers, we are not here to throw our men blindly at the Spaniards' guns. We are here to break him with intelligence, patience, and precision. The enemy believes his forts and reserves make him secure. We will prove him wrong. From the south and the east, we shall open the battle. Qaid Amar will lead the southern attack with artillery and the strong contingents of Blubberdick and Minhas. Your task is to seize Fort Alfonso, then Fort Camel. From Camel's Heights you can threaten Melilla itself. Wararni Makerel. From the east you will strike to confuse the Spaniards and support Amar, forcing their scouts to report threats from every direction. These attacks are our diversion. They must appear as the main effort so that the enemy commits his reserves against them. But this is only the first step. The true blow will come from the west. 3 hours after battle begins, Guidehill and Salmon will bring the main force forward with speed and determination. Your objective is Melilla. Do not become entangled with minor obstacles. Bypass forts when you can. Silence machine guns swiftly and keep moving. The city must be reached before the Spaniards can shift their strength back. Understand this. The diversionary attacks and the main attack will not rely on communication. Each must act as if alone, yet all are part of one plan. Should an open line appear, use it, but do not depend upon it. The enemy's advantage lies in his weapons, not his spirit. Our advantage lies in numbers, in surprise, and in the will of men defending their land. We must accept losses if we are to strike decisively. Speed, aggression, and discipline will decide the outcome. Chiefs, remember your roles. Hold firm to the plan. If we succeed, the Spaniards will find their city exposed, their garrisons outmaneuvered, and their pride broken. That is our aim. That is how we will take Melilla. Now, chiefs, ride to your commands. Tomorrow the mountains will echo not with the sound of chains, but with the roar of our victory.
0800. At dawn, our legionnaires held the central forts about Melilla, their silhouettes stark against the morning haze. Reports reached headquarters of a considerable Rifian host gathering in the direction of Fort Sidi Aguariach. Coronel Milan Astre, ever decisive, ordered the concentration of our detachments upon that point. Only Teniente Coronel Aguirre was left at Fort Triana, entrusted with the task of holding that exposed post against a Rifian column, advancing along the coast. Though their number seemed modest at first, I knew well the peril. In those hills and dunes, a small band could grow into a torrent without warning. 0815, the enemy began to stir in earnest. Crossing the neutral zone, 2 of their columns pushed out towards Fort Alfonso, while a third remained with their guns. It was those guns that opened the day's account, shells slamming into the ramparts of Sidi Aguariach and cutting down several riflemen. I still remember the sharp cries and the dust rising from the breach, the first taste of blood that morning. Down the coast road, the Riffian chieftain Warami Makerel advanced with his detachment until Fort Triana stood before him. Teniente Coronel Aguirre, resolute as ever, set his men to their posts and prepared to receive the assault. I trusted his steel. He was the sort to hold until his last cartridge. Elsewhere, Teniente Coronel Junk Jack remained at Baja Fuerte de Cabrerizas, a prudent man, ordering new works thrown up to strengthen his position. Within Sidi Aguariach, Teniente Coronels El Cid and Franco braced their companies against the fire, refusing to yield an inch. Coronel Milan Astre himself, with Gonzales and the ever-energetic Nick the Nuker, pressed on in forced march to reach the fort. We could feel the weight of the coming storm, our detachments scattered, the enemy moving in strength, and only our discipline and courage to bind the line together. 0830. By 8:30, the field was alive with movement. Riffian chieftains, Blubberdick and Cade Amar, pressed their Riffian bands upon Fort Alfonso, where a lone rifle company bore the weight of their advance. I could only imagine the strain upon those men, outnumbered and with little but their walls and discipline to sustain them. Further east, the chieftain Arexim Minhas shifted his forces into position, even as Teniente Coronel Franco drove his command forward to engage the enemy artillery. It was a bold stroke. Franco never was one to shrink from a decisive thrust, and for the first time that day, the Riffian guns faced a real challenge. At last, Coronel Astre and Gonzales reached the battered bastions of Sidi Aguariach. There, El Cid and his riflemen still clung to their posts, despite the pounding, their banners blackened by powder smoke. The sight of the Coronel arriving stiffened every man's spine. Astre's presence was like a shield in itself. Meanwhile, Junk Jack, having thrown up some rough defenses around Baja Fuerte de Cabrerizas, shifted his banderas towards Melilla. His eye for the wider field was keen, and his maneuver gave his men a measure of flexibility should the enemy attempt to envelop us. Down by the coast, Warami Makerel's men continued towards Aguirre at Fort Triana, though their progress faltered as they busied themselves scavenging through the barracks for better arms. It was a reprieve Aguirre did not waste, his men tightening their grip on every loophole and embrasure. 0845. By now the battlefield had become a complex chessboard of maneuvers. I observed, with both admiration and concern, as the Riffian chieftain Arexim Minas sought to outflank Franco's banderas at Fort Sidi Aguariach. Franco's men, however, had steel in their resolve. His machine gun company drove the enemy back, halting what might have been a deadly assault. To complicate matters, Cade Amar detached part of his Harka, once bound for Fort Alfonso, and moved to strike Franco's flank. The remainder of his men, along with Blubberdick's command, pressed resolutely toward their original objective. Coronel Astre, Gonzales, and El Cid advanced to intercept the converging Riffian forces, a maneuver that promised to be both daring and decisive. On the coastal front, Warami Makerel's detachment continued to ransack our barracks, seeking superior weapons to bring to bear on Fort Triana. Aguirre's men, however, were vigilant. Their machine guns tore into the Riffian advance with deadly precision. I was told later that as Al-Khattabi himself rode along the road, only narrowly evaded death. A hail of machine gun fire ripped past him, cutting down one of his staff and forcing the leader to abandon the road and dive into the Rambla. Even at a distance, they could see the fury and determination in that man. His personal courage remarkable, even as the guns drove him aside. Nick the Nuker pressed his long march, while Junkjack still had ground to cover before reaching Sidi Aguariach. The day, it seemed, was only beginning, and every movement, every decision carried the weight of Melilla's fate. 0900. By 9 o'clock, the two forces began to converge in earnest between Sidi Aguariach and Fort Alfonso. The first of the Riffian Harka warbands pressed forward, only to be thrown back by the disciplined volleys of Teniente Coronel Gonzalez's banderas. I could see the pride in Gonzalez's men as they held the line. Their steadiness under fire was a testament to training and iron will. Meanwhile, Coronel Astre's own contingent moved into position, a visible anchor for the scattered Spanish formations. The sight of his banner advancing, powder smoke curling about it, never failed to inspire confidence among our men. Farther afield, Teniente Coronel Junkjack was still on the march, seeking a crossing near Fort San Lorenzo. His movements were deliberate, precise, always seeking the position that would give us advantage in the hours to come. Nick the Nuker, who had been marching steadily since dawn, finally arrived near Sidi Aguariach. His presence, long awaited, bolstered the morale of those already weary from the morning's exertions. From my vantage point, the battlefield seemed to contract and expand with each maneuver. Every command, every march, brought the enemy closer. And with each step, I could sense the tension mounting, the inevitability of collision looming. 0915. The riverbanks between Fort Sidi Aguariach and Fort Alfonso had become a maelstrom of smoke, lead, and dust. Fighting raged along the entire line. The Riffian artillery, though relentless, was gradually losing the advantage as our disciplined volleys and concentrated fire forced their Harka back time and again. I could see the exhaustion etched on their faces even from a distance, and yet their leaders pressed on, relentless in their attempt to gain ground. Along the coast, Makerel's detachment had succeeded in looting a substantial cache of modern rifles from our barracks. This windfall might have given them a real chance to press Aguirre's banderas back, had it not been for the prudence and cunning of our own men. Aguirre's position remained strong, and the movement of Junkjack's banderas towards Fort Camel offered a critical buffer. I knew that how Junkjack chose to deploy those men could very well decide whether Aguirre held or was forced to retreat. From my vantage point, it felt as though every decision, every march, every volley could tip the scales in a matter of minutes. The ground was covered in bullet shell casings rather than blood at that hour. But I knew it was only the beginning. Each moment tested the mettle of our men, and the field seemed to stretch endlessly, as if the battle itself sought to measure our courage and resolve. 0930. Soon enough, the tide of battle seemed to shift. The Riffian forces began a general withdrawal, falling back toward the higher ground where I knew they would find better cover and prepare for another stand. Our men, hearts steeled by the morning's clash, were eager to pursue. There was a palpable determination not to grant the enemy even a moment's respite. No chance to regroup. No opportunity to strike again with renewed strength. From my vantage point, I could see the dust clouds rising as they retreated, a warning of the difficult ground ahead. Yet I also saw the spark of triumph in our ranks, tempered by the ever-present knowledge that the battle was far from over. Even in withdrawal, the enemy remained cunning. Every movement had to be measured, lest pride lead us into an ambush. 09:45, reports reached us of yet another large Riffian force maneuvering near a Fort Fuerte de Rostrogordo, advancing towards Melilla itself. A dispatch was promptly sent to Teniente Coronel Junkjack, ordering him to engage this new threat and prevent it from joining the fray. Across the battlefield our men were pressing relentlessly. On all fronts the Riffians were being driven back, forced to relinquish ground they had sought to hold. Still, I knew they would not surrender lightly. They were searching for defensible positions, higher ground where they might regroup and prepare another line of resistance. From my vantage, it was clear that the day's struggle was far from decided. Every advance had to be measured, every move weighed carefully. Victory demanded vigilance as much as courage. 10:00. By 10 o'clock it became evident that the Riffians, pursued relentlessly, were seeking stronger positions along more defensible lines. If they chose to make their stand there, I knew the task before our men would grow considerably more difficult. The ground favored them, and every ridge and ravine could be turned into a trap for those pressing the attack. Later, I heard that Teniente Coronel Junkjack had voiced concerns about the approach he was making. He sensed the danger, a premonition of the deadly situation awaiting him, and his unease was not misplaced. I always admired his caution. A commander who could measure risk as he did even under pressure was worth his weight in gold. Yet there was also the unmistakable determination in him to advance, to meet the enemy, and to seize the initiative before the Riffians could push on Melilla. 10:15. By now our men were driving the Riffians steadily back, yet we approached a point in the battle that felt critical in every sense. Ahead lay a position that could determine the day's outcome, a juncture where victory might be won or lost. We prepared to engage in close combat, hoping to shatter the enemy lines, yet I knew it would not be an easy task. The Harka were trained for such fighting. Their familiarity with hand-to-hand conflict, combined with superior numbers, should they resist the urge to flee, meant that every step forward carried real danger. Amid this, Teniente Coronel Junkjack pressed on toward Fort Baja Fuerte de Cabrerizas. He would arrive in time to meet the advance of Riffian chieftains, Guide Heel, and Salmon Sizable Riffian command, a responsibility as dangerous as it was vital. I could only hope that his judgment, tempered by experience and steel resolve, would see him through the coming struggle. 10:30. At last, our men moved into close combat with the Riffians upon the high ground. The advantage we had enjoyed at range was now gone. Rifles and machine guns, which had so far dictated the pace of the battle, were largely neutralized by the proximity and rugged terrain. Here, numbers mattered more than firepower, and the enemy's greater strength threatened to tip the scales. Teniente Coronel Junkjack, advancing toward Fort Baja Fuerte de Cabrerizas, saw the magnitude of the task before him as the full size of the Riffian force revealed itself. The realization would have likely struck him that this was a fight that would demand every ounce of courage, every measure of discipline, and every scrap of experience his men possessed. 10:45. Along the coast, Teniente Coronel Aguirre had successfully repelled Makerel's Riffian detachment, and for the first time in the morning, his men found themselves pressing the enemy back. At the main battle, the fighting near the neutral zone was utter chaos. Smoke, dust, and the din of rifles and shouts, creating a haze through which it was hard to see friend from foe. Though our troops were gaining the upper hand, the relentless pressure of Riffian numbers was beginning to exact its toll. Legionnaires, stalwart and disciplined, were nevertheless straining under the weight of continuous combat. Even El Cid, whose banderas had held so bravely through the morning, was forced to give ground, retreating toward Fort Alfonso. The sight was sobering. No triumph came without cost, and each yard ceded or gained seemed measured in sweat and blood. From my vantage point I could feel the tension coiling tighter with every volley and charge. The Riffians, though faltering here and there, remained a dangerous, unpredictable force, and I knew well that our men's courage would be tested again before the day was done. 1100. Though we had achieved some measure of success in the morning's frontal assaults, it was increasingly clear that the sheer weight of Riffian numbers could not be overcome by courage alone. Our lines, stretched thin and beginning to falter, showed signs of strain, and the enemy was poised to take advantage of every weakness. The specter of a counterattack hung over the field like a gathering storm. In the southeast, Teniente Coronel Junkjack's men braced themselves for what promised to be a fierce onslaught. The Riffians were advancing, their banners and war cries heralding the coming clash. I'm sure the men could see the tension in his stance, the quiet determination of a commander, aware that the coming moments would test the mettle of every soldier under his command. Along the coast, by contrast, the fighting was beginning to ease. The Riffians seemed content to hold their ground against Aguirre, maintaining a steady defense rather than pressing the attack. Even there, however, the ever-present danger remained, and I knew that the morning's exertions had left our men weary. For all our early gains, the battle was far from decided, and the coming hours would demand every ounce of discipline and courage that the Spanish Foreign Legion could muster. 11:15. By this hour, nearly half the combatants in the hills, on both sides, were spent. The Riffians, though fierce and numerous, were beginning to show the strain of continuous engagement. Only the rigorous training and discipline of our men kept them on the field. The tribesmen, I knew, would have been far more likely to break and scatter under such pressure. If they chose to press forward, it would likely be to their own peril. The large Riffian force drew closer around Fort Baja Fuerte de Cabrerizas. Teniente Coronel Junkjack and his men, though weary from their morning march and skirmishes, steeled themselves to sell their lives dearly. I could see in his posture the grim awareness that, while courage could make a stand, it could not halt the march of overwhelming numbers indefinitely. The question that weighed on me, and I imagine on him as well, was whether their stand, heroic though it might be, would slow the Riffian advance toward Melilla enough to matter. Every second, every volley could tip the balance, and yet our men refused to yield. The battlefield had become a test not just of strength, but of endurance and will. I felt the weight of that reality pressing down as I watched the weary figures of our legionnaires brace once more for what was to come. 11:30. By 11:30 our machine guns had been brought into position, and once again our men pressed the Riffians back across several fronts. The rattle of gunfire and the sudden forward surges gave the impression that victory might still be wrested from the day. Yet, as I watched the battlefield unfold, a grave concern weighed upon me. No reinforcements had been sent to Teniente Coronel Jungjak. His command, holding fast at Fort Baja Fuerte de Cabrerizas, was left perilously isolated. I knew with a sinking certainty that unless aid arrived soon, both his men and the fort would likely fall to the encircling enemy. Along the coast, the fighting had finally subsided. Both Spanish and Riffian forces had withdrawn beyond effective range, leaving the battered ground between them quiet for the moment. It was a rare respite, and yet the stillness carried its own tension, as if the battlefield itself held its breath, waiting for the next surge. 11:45. Our men prepared to press forward again with renewed vigor, determined to finish what the morning's skirmishes had set in motion. The Riffians, though battered and driven back on several fronts, were stubbornly holding, their resistance a grim testament to their tenacity. However, the situation at Fort Baja Fuerte de Cabrerizas had grown dire. Teniente Coronel Jungjak and his men, exhausted from the relentless fighting, were preparing for their final stand. It would have been clear to all who could see. Courage alone would not suffice. The fort and the brave souls within it were moments away from being overwhelmed. The thought has weighed heavily on me. Even the most disciplined and resolute men could not withstand numbers such as these, and their sacrifice, though heroic, seemed inevitable. I reflected that the advance through the neutral zone and the tragedy at Fort Baja Fuerte de Cabrerizas unfolded simultaneously, a stark reminder that in battle, triumph and loss are often separated by only a few yards or moments. 1200. By noon, our men opened fire upon the Riffian force with every gun and rifle at their disposal. Yet the enemy's positions and natural cover blunted much of our firepower. Even so, I knew it was only a matter of time before their resolve would waver, and they would be forced from the battlefield. At Fort Baja Fuerte de Cabrerizas, Teniente Coronel Jungjak's banderas were finally overwhelmed. I later heard that he had fought with remarkable bravery, pistol and sword in hand, firing into the pressing mass of Riffians. Each shot a small act of defiance against the inevitable. Yet even his courage, and that of the men around him, could not turn the tide. The fort fell, and Jungjak went down beneath a storm of saber thrusts and cuts, his life claimed in a final heroic stand. Having forced the Riffian host back into the neutral zone, we believed the worst had passed. Reports then reached us that the enemy who had stormed the Fort Baja Fuerte de Cabrerizas had not dispersed, but had pressed forward and seized Melilla itself. We marched at once, though wearied and diminished, determined to reclaim the town. Yet when we arrived at her outskirts, what we found chilled the heart. The Riffians had turned our own defenses against us. The forts that were once ours now stood resolute against us, and the machine guns once manned by legionaries were trained upon their former masters. Each bastion had become a wound, cut deeper by betrayal of our own steel and stone. We fought, yes, but the cost was ruinous, and soon it was plain that Melilla was lost. The order was given to withdraw what remained of our strength, and the evacuation began under constant fire. Columns of weary men, their uniforms in tatters, filed to the ships with faces hollow from exhaustion and disbelief. Behind us, the city was consumed by the enemy's banners and the smoke of our defeat. I remember standing on the deck, watching Melilla fade into the haze. In that silence, heavier than any bombardment, I asked myself what Spain could do now. Surely Madrid would answer with fury, for the loss of Melilla is not merely a battlefield reverse. It is a wound to national pride, one that will demand blood in return. Yet I feared then, as I fear now, that the vengeance to come would consume more lives than Spain could ever spare. The fall of Melilla was not the end of the Legion, nor of Spain's war in Africa, but it marked the end of our innocence, if ever we had one. From that day, we knew the enemy was not to be dismissed as mere tribesmen, but a force capable of humbling an empire. And though we returned to fight again, a part of us never left those broken walls. Thus ended my account of those dark days, the loss of Melilla, the evacuation of our battered columns, and the bitter sight of the Legion's own forts turned against us. I have written of positions taken and lost, of orders given and obeyed. But what lingers most in memory are the faces of the men who did not return. Their names are etched in reports and casualty lists, yet no paper can capture the courage with which they fought, nor the silence with which they endured the final march. As for myself, the echoes of gunfire may fade, but the memory of those who stood beside me in that crucible will not. They are with me still, in every silence, in every cicada song of an Andalusian summer, and they will remain until I too am called to their company. Teniente Coronel Pedro Friedora.